Well, hey Gundam Maniacs, welcome to another episode of Gundam Explained. In this episode, I'm doing something a little different, and I'm going to be reviewing Evangelion, Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is an anime that is probably the anime I've known the most of my life without even watching. It's because of getting into Gundam that I've been getting into their anime, and I thought it would be important to get into Evangelion because I love Shin Godzilla. Not only is it one of my favorite Godzilla movies, but it's up there in favorite movies anyway. Hideaki Anno, the creator of Evangelion, did Shin Godzilla. And then we know that G-Quax that's coming out is being made by the same production company. I know a lot of people say, well, it's not him making it, but he contributed to writing some of the designs. And just by looking at it, it has that EVA feel. But as a Gundam fan, how did I like watching Evangelion? Now, when I first got into Gundam, I did pop it on to watch, and after the first couple episodes, I was just bored and moved on. This might be the type of show that requires you to be in the right headspace, but I think it's worth it. I do believe it meets the hype that seems to follow it around everywhere, but there's some interesting aspects and storytelling in it that I want to cover here, because I find it interesting in many ways how much, to me, Evangelion seems like, Anno is taking a love of Godzilla and Gundam and actually mashing it together and doubling down on some of the themes that are used in both. For instance, in Evangelion, you get these giant Evangelions, which are like giant mecha, but then they're kind of alive, so it's kind of like kaiju. And then in the show, giant kaiju attacks. They call them angels, and it has a lot of biblical references. I mean, I know I say biblical because you could even go as far back as Sumerian mythology, and it talks about some of the same things. So I think what's interesting here is how it just involves a lot of ancient human mythology, not too dissimilar from F91. And what was it? Was it not the Crossbone Vanguard, but anyway, in F91, there's that mural in the background of the Sumerian, one of the Sumerian murals. I forget what it's called, but they're holding the handbags and everything. Very interesting stuff that we see in anime. And that's what's interesting about this, because even though the Evangelions are supposed to be giant mechs piloted by people, they're also living things, and they're kind of monstrous. So this is where I see like the combination of the best of Godzilla and Gundam is put together here on display. Hideaki Anno grew up loving Godzilla. In fact, in the 80s, he did make a little short with a story that had to do with Godzilla, but with reporters. And it's funny that got used in the later, I want to say it was Godzilla vs. I forget, but it has a scene that was ripped from one of Anno's fan films. So Evangelion has amazing animation. It has a very intriguing story because it's almost like horror themed in a way. There's sort of body horror elements, existential elements. But what this show does, it seems to double down on something I think Gundam did with Amuro, and that's how Amuro kind of acts like a whiny kid. But instead, Evangelion does it where they go a little bit deeper. This is where that postmodernism comes in, where it's almost like the thoughts of the characters are actually what takes precedent over the story and the world we're being told. So that's one thing in general, and it's okay with me, is I don't think the Evangelion, however you say it, world is fleshed out as much as it could be, but I don't think it needs to be. It doesn't need to be that. This is its own different thing that I think works. And we get some pretty interesting protagonists. We get the young kids that are piloting these machines. There's the discussion about kids being involved with all of this violence, very similar stuff we see from Gundam. But what Evangelion does is it takes its time. It'll even have whole episodes dedicated to what's going on in someone's mind. And there's multiple aspects of this, from isolation to depression. And I think what is interesting that could be going on here, and I'm really just guessing here, is these characters are written with, I guess, turmoil that people have kind of gone through in real life. Sometimes when writing stories, especially good stories, if you can grab from moments and instances in your life or others that you know, and it almost sort of becomes a message, because like country music, you can align with something that someone is going through, and then you're like, you know what, I'm going through that too. I think the character of Shinji seems to act like what you could get from a typical, teenager in a way. Teenagers can be different, but the idea of kind of the social anxiety, isolation, I think that's something that might have been more prevalent in Japan at the time, but it certainly is in the US here today, especially since COVID. The final two episodes, it was interesting because it's not like they really resolved anything that had to do with the world and the story. And that's because that's not what the show is. What the last 2 episodes did was they were in the mind of the characters, of what I was talking about before, getting into their emotions, really just putting it on display for the viewer. Some of those elements maybe a viewer can connect with. But for me personally, while I appreciate that type of writing, the fact that this was as many episodes as it was, and then it ends the last 2 episodes being in the mind of the characters, that would have been better spread out earlier on than the final 2 episodes. It's almost like it's filler, but instead I would say it's more of unneeded exposition, because basically what the characters are really talking about is, yeah, I act like this, I do this, I feel like this sometimes. It's almost like telling the audience what we had already witnessed. Some shows and movies do this in general, and it could just be part of the writing in terms of, let's make it very clear for any audience member, or as a writer, I want to express what is happening here. And again, going back to that Gundam and Godzilla thing, it is very interesting. Late last year, I watched tons of Godzilla and beginning this year, and mainly the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. I had already watched the old stuff when I was a kid. I was interested in watching the newer stuff because it's very fascinating to see that Anno really picks up a lot of his influences from Godzilla. And then also Gundam, he worked on Char's Counterattack. So think about that. He made this little fan film in the 80s with Godzilla. He also worked on Char's Counterattack. His studio is right now making or releasing a Gundam show, and he also had a Godzilla come out recently. And watching Evangelion, I am seeing the things I like about Godzilla and the things I like about Gundam smashed together. And it gets even deeper because the music used in Evangelion is music that is in Shin Godzilla. Specifically certain scenarios where there's an event that's going that's not character driven, it's more world driven, like a kaiju show up, Godzilla show up, an angel show up. All of a sudden you get locations with texts or people's names. It starts playing these like drums that you might be familiar with that Evangelion does a lot. It's the same music in Shin Godzilla. So as someone that watched Shin Godzilla before Evangelion, to me, Shin Godzilla, after watching Evangelion, is an Evangelion live action movie. They just don't have the same designs, but all the elements are there. I would even say Shin Godzilla isn't some sort of commentary on bureaucracy. I think it comes off that way, but what this really is the storytelling technique that Anno likes to use in order to get in the heads of characters. Bureaucracy is part of all of his storytelling as far back as like Gunbuster. Gunbuster is a favorite of mine. And there's that hierarchy of characters. And because of that relationship, you're getting a lot of different emotional storylines that are occurring. And that, I think that was the intention with the Shin Godzilla. It's really another way of Anno to do a storytelling technique of really getting into the minds of characters, how they interact with each other based on power dynamics. And while I think the animation in Evangelion is great, there are some moments that brought me back to things that I dislike about 08MS Team, even Wing, some anime of that era that I think is just a personal thing, and that's really how they draw the noses. Sometimes the noses are so simply drawn that I have trouble correlating a human connection with that character, almost towards like kind of goofy and nonsensical. Whereas there's other anime at that time and before and after where they put more detail in the nose. I know that's a small thing, but what's also interesting that I see this in Seed and 08MS Team is the inconsistency of the drawing. And not that that's being done because of being lazy, but I think in Japanese anime, depending on if it's a hero shot or just a full shot, they will add different layers of detail to the noses. So it is possible to get a more detailed human look that I have a better connection with. But a lot of times in these 90s, mid-90s anime, it seems to be, they're missing their noses, and that's hard on me. I know that's a weird one, but I want to throw that out there because despite that, I still think that what I watched met the hype of Evangelion my whole life. Because, that came out, 96, 95, 96, and I think up until 98 in the US when they were releasing VHS tapes with 2 episodes. I mean, think about it. Think about only getting to watch 2 episodes at a time every few months. That's insane. And I think that would be a good experience, except if you got to the last 2 episodes and you're like, I waited for this. And so what's my takeaway here with, as a Gundam fan that got into anime recently watching Evangelion is I get the hype. I really do. Evangelion is really cool. I can't wait to watch the other movies. Where I guess like the first movie that came out afterwards is kind of a recap. And then the second one actually has like alternate or extended ending, so it'll be interesting to see that. But I like to look at the show as its original form, as it was intended by that artist. That artist being Hideaki Anno, who I would put up there with Tomino, with George Lucas, with these creators that, they have others around there that are helping them, but they're really spearheading a very unique approach to storytelling and visuals too. Anyway, let me know what you think. I think it's crazy that at my age, at like 41, finally got to Evangelion, and it met the hype that I would see for decades or years, maybe video game magazines online. When you would see things that show anime, you would always see Evangelion. That's like, for me, that seems like that is the biggest anime alongside Dragon Ball and like Sailor Moon and all that stuff. Yeah, so curious what you think. Did you like the Evangelion show? Are you a Gundam fan and an Evangelion fan? And I would not even say one is better than the other. In my opinion, they're both serving completely different purposes. And I think that's why I liked Evangelion, because I was getting a different experience than just watching another Gundam show. So anyway, it's very fun. Can't wait to watch the rest of the movies. Can't wait to watch G-Quacks to see if that storytelling techniques that are used in Evangelion, that we see in Shin Godzilla, that we see in Gunbuster, Anno's trademark, is that going to be in this Gundam show? And will that make it good? Will that make it bad? I don't know. Excited to find out. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. And thanks to Art Rovo Gundam, supporter of this video and this channel. And shout out to the supporters who make this possible. If that's something you're interested in, check the links below, or just at least subscribe. Maybe that would help. But also, there's a link for our Discord, and then the Discord's a lot of fun. Share Art Gunpla Talk Anime. I was posting my thoughts on Evangelion in there yesterday, and I had some cool interactions there, so check that out if you want to. Anyway, heading out. We'll talk later. Be cool.